This video is going to cover adding attachments to our messages. So we already have images here. We're going to have audio, and we also have video as well as generic documents. We're just going to add a little plus button next to the message bar, and then we'll be able to, let's say, select, let's go for the audio through the video. We'll hit open. You can see it automatically generates a scroll bar and adds the attachments. And I can also get rid of some of these if I want to. Maybe I'll get rid of the video and I'll just send the audio and the two pictures. And then you'll be able to send those attachments. So that's the basic idea. I'm going to stop the server and we can get started really quick. Okay, so I've gone ahead and I've started the server. I need to full screen my notes over here. We're going to be going a little bit quicker today. But the basic idea is we need to come into our models and our message.rb. And in our message.rb, we need to add some attachments. So we're going to say this has many attachments, dependent destroy. We then have our confirm participant. And above that, we're going to want to create a method that we will call chat attachment. And then in the chat attachment, we want to say if the target, or we want the target to be equal to the attachments index, then we want to return unless the attachments is attached. So we're just doing a null check. And then we want to say if the target is an image, then we return a variant for the image. Else if it's a video, we return a variant for the video. Otherwise, we don't do anything. That way, we're not trying to resize a Word document, for example. So that's sort of the entire logic here. This is just a small helper we're going to be making. So we've added attachments, and then we've created this helper. Next, we'll have to come into our controllers and our messages controller, which I need to open up. And then in our messages controller, I'm going to full screen this actually. The first thing we can do is we can tab this over a bit. So I'm just going to replace this. It's the same thing as before, current user.messages.create, body and room, but then we're also passing in the attachments as the message params attachments, which of course means that we have to permit the attachments. Oops, it's actually going to be attachments : and then we're going to do an empty array. So that's it for our messages controller. This is all basic this is all basic active storage stuff. Let's now move over to our views partial. So we're going to go over to our underscore message.html.erb. So this is where we're going to decide what we're going to display. Currently we have the image tag up here. That's fine. We have our user and our email, and then we have the message body. But below the message body, we actually want to, outside of the div, but down here with the message body, we want to create a div and just put the message body inside of it. And then below that, we want to say if the message.attachments.attached, then we want to iterate through each of the attachments. So we're going to say message.attachments.each with index, do attachment, comma index. So this is just our image or our file, and then this is the index in the array. And then we want to say if the attachment is an image, then we need to create a image tag. If otherwise, the attachment might be a video, and then we'll just tab this over. And then we'll put in a video tag. So you can sort of see what we're doing here. For each of these, we're going to have a different tag for the type of file that it is. So naturally, the next one's going to be, is it audio? And then yes, there is in fact an audio tag provided by Rails. So we'll throw that one in. And then else, it's just going to be a file like that, with our end, and then we actually need two more ends after this because of our nested logic. So you might want to put this into a partial or two or some helpers just to clean this up a bit. But this is the basic idea for our attachments. Now you could style this a little bit better. Speaking of which, I will have a link in the video description for the CSS for this. It's going to be inside of a style sheet, so we need to create that. Say new file, and I think I called this chatroom.css. And then for the chatroom.css, I will just copy and paste this in, and then I'll scroll through this slowly. Essentially, this is all of the styling that is done to create those little panels, those preview panels. So I'm just going to scroll through this. We have our attachment previews, which is our overall container. We also have our attachment preview, which is a specific item in the container, so one of those panels. Then we have the cancel button, which is the red X. We have an on hover for the cancel button, so you can see that you're able to click it. We then have an attachment for the image container and the preview image, because we need to style those. And then there is some generic styling for the scroll bars, which is why those looked a little bit different. So that is it. I'll have that linked in the video description. You're probably not here to see me struggle with CSS. The next thing we have to do is come into our new message form.html.erb. And in here, there's going to be a lot that we need to do. So we have our old form here, which is our message form. But what we need to do is we have this controller. This is fine. It is calling reset form, also fine. But we need to create a div for our attachment previews. So we're going to come out of this div right here, I think. Actually, this div should be down here. So we're going to come in here, and then in our form, we're going to paste in this div. This is going to be our preview container, which is going to have a controller and an action that we'll have to create because we're going to be using Stimulus for this. So after this attachment previews, we will then have our actual file field. Now for this, I'm going to paste this in. It's going to be lines 11 through 17. We're going to have a div with the class of image upload, a label for the message attachments, and then the actual upload button, which is the little plus. We'll then have a file field for our attachments with multiple set to true, which is why you're able to select multiple files. And then when we click on the actual button here, it's going to call from the message dash preview, and it's going to say on change. So after you click OK in the file explorer, after you select your files, it's going to call on change in message preview, and it's going to call a preview function. So this is just our sort of like our on click or our on change function right here, but it's inside of a Stimulus controller. I actually built all of this out in vanilla JavaScript first, and then I converted it to Stimulus because I'm more familiar with JavaScript. But outside of this div, we're going to put in a text field for the body ID. And this is going to be our chat text, which is actually this f.text field up here. So I'm just going to delete this because we now have it down here. And then we need our submit button, which is actually up here. I'm going to get rid of this because our new submit button looks like this. So we say f.submit send. We say f.submit send. Data is disabled with false. Our controller's message preview. Our action is a on click. So on click, we're going to call clear previews. So whenever we hit send, it's going to clear our previews pane. And then we just give it a button primary still. So that is about it as far as I'm aware for this, but I think we need to close one of these divs. So I'm going to do that right now. And then, yeah, that looks right. So we have one div before the end and one div after it. Now the final thing we're going to do is we're going to create a, I'm going to close this. We're going to come into app, JavaScript, controllers, and we're going to create a new file. We're going to call this message underscore preview. We're going to call this message underscore preview underscore controller.js. And this is going to be quite a large file. So I'm going to be copying and pasting quite a bit of code here, but I'll try to go slow so that you can at least keep up. The first thing I have is a comment. So I'm just going to be pasting in the comments to sort of supplement what I'm saying here. We are creating a controller just like we normally do. So we're going to say export default class controller. And then inside of this, we're going to have you normally have your connect method where you just check if your component is connected, but we're actually going to not use that. And instead, we're going to create a preview method. So this is our preview panel method. And the first thing we do in here, whenever we call the preview, we also call clear previews. Because there is actually a bug with my setup where if you were to select 4 files, close the File Explorer or hit OK on the File Explorer, delete those files, and then select maybe 3 more. So you have, let's say, 4 total with 3 recently selected. You'll only upload whatever your last selection was. So you won't keep any of the remnants. Now there's a way to fix that, which we'll talk about in a minute here. But because of the state of JavaScript right now, this is actually a little bit confusing. But we'll get to that in a second. So we're going to loop through our files. So we're going to say for I equals 0. So we're just iterating. And then we're going to say this dot targets instead of dot target, dot element, dot files, dot length. So we're iterating through each of the files in our whatever is calling the preview method, which in our form, the preview method is called when the file field is being set. So this is grabbing the files that the file field had selected. So I selected 2 images and an audio file and a video file. And then we're going to iterate through each of those. So we'll start by just saying let file equal this dot targets dot element files I. You could, of course, change this to a for each loop. This was sort of me still trying to figure out what to do here to make this work. And then I sort of forgot to refactor this. But the next thing we're going to do is create a reader. And then after we create the reader, we are then going to call a very wordy function that I called this dot create and display file preview elements, where I pass in the individual file and I pass in the reader. Okay, so that's a mouthful, but now we have some more comments. So what this function is going to do is it's going to basically sort through our logic, or it's going to prime ourselves to sort through our logic, and then it's going to attach the necessary components. I don't know why GitHub Copilot's even trying to help here. I barely understand what's going on. So the first thing we have to do, because we're using a reader, is we're going to say reader.onload. And then we have a element, which is going to come from a method that we call let element equal this dot construct previews, where we pass in the file and the reader. Now let's go down to the construct previews real quick, and then we'll come back to this function. So construct previews takes in 2 arguments, returns the element for us. So when it's creating this element, the first thing we need to actually do, well, I guess the first thing we should do is actually define the function. So there is our function. But when we start with this, we're actually going to create the element first, and then we are going to create a cancel function. So we're just saying let cancel function equal, and then we're assigning that to an anonymous function that calls this dot remove preview. And this is just because we're going to be passing in some arguments here. So this is going to be a switch. Please don't cancel me. So for our switch, we're going to have multiple cases. And this is just going to be a switch based on the file type. So you can see here, I'm going through the images that I might expect to get here. And then for each of these, I'm going to call a method called element.create whatever. So here I have this .create image element. And a lot of these are going to look very similar. But at least for the image element, we can go down and create that real quick. So our image element is going to take in the cancel function and the reader. So here we have the cancel function and the reader. We then need to create 2 empty variables. So we have our cancel upload button and our element. We then create a const for the image by saying document.create element img. So this is us creating our actual HTML element. We then want to assign to that image the attribute. So we're modifying the style, and we set the background image of that image to be the reader.result of the file. So it's actually grabbing the data from that file and setting it to be the background image. So when you look at the actual HTML for this image element, it's going to be massive because it's just going to be the data from the actual image. We then say for the image, we want to add a class, which we called preview image, which in our chat room here is just a image that is set to an absolute position with a background size of contained, so it fits in it, and then we just set the width and height to be 100. So that's just sort of to force it to be properly displayed. We then say, okay, we did that. We now need our element to be document.create element. And this is why we have different functions depending on where we are in the switch case, because in the case of an image, we actually need to wrap it in a div. We then say element.classList. So our outer div, we're attaching the attachment image container class to, and we're also attaching a file removal class to it. And you can keep looking at the CSS for these if you want to. We then have the element.append child for the image. So we're taking the image and we're appending it to this outer div. So it's now inside of this div. We then create the cancel upload button, which is just a icon. And speaking of the icon, we should probably come over here and go to Bootstrap 5 icons. We'll click on the first link, and then it will, at the bottom here, I think, it'll give you instructions for how to add the CDN right here. And then you just grab that CDN, and you come over to your application.html.erb file. And then below your other CDN for the Bootstrap, you paste in the CDN for the icons. And then you can also come up to your, the Bootstrap docs for Bootstrap 5 and grab the JS bundle as well. And just paste in the JS bundle. So this is for our icons. The bundle is actually to fix our drop downs and stuff when we click on them, because right now there's no JavaScript for those. Okay, we created our icon. Now we need to add some classes to it. So we're just going to create this a x-circle-fill with the cancel upload button. We then assign a onClick to this cancel button, which is our onClick function that we made earlier, which is sort of why we created it and we passed it through. And then we, of course, append the onClick to whatever the child or to the outer element. So we want the cancel upload button assigned to the div and not to the image, just because of how we're resizing it. And then after that, we want to say return element. So that is our create image function. Now we're going to have very similar functions for everything else. And I'll just quickly walk through those, but the overall logic is going to be very much the same. So we're going to come down here and I'm just going to paste it in. It's basically the same comment. Create audio element. It says let cancel button an element. This time we create the element as an icon, and we just use the audio preview icon because there's really no way to visually preview a audio file. So instead we do what Discord does, which is just a icon from Bootstrap blown up to the same size as a preview image. So I guess we'll take a look at that in a little bit. But we then create the cancel button and we just position it on top of this as if it were an image, just like the last one. But because this one's not in an outer div, it's just the icon itself. That's why we need different functions and different logic throughout this. We need to be a little bit clever about how we're selecting the logic. But you'll see that in a little bit. I'll talk about that. We then create the onClick again, append the element, and return the element. So that is it for our audio element. We now have a almost identical situation for the video element. Here we preview the icon. We do a video preview icon, and we do the file earmark play fill as the overall icon. And then we, of course, add the cancel button and do everything else. The last one we have is actually just one for if you have a default file. And it's going to look exactly the same comment, same parameters. You just say, instead of using a video file or an audio file, we just use a regular file check. We add the cancel button, we return the element. So that's it for all of our stuff. We can now come back up to our cases because we now have all these functions. After we do the images, we can then do the videos. And because of how active storage works, this is actually pretty simple. A lot of this is just, my styling is all weird. It's just grabbing the file names, right? Because HTML and also active storage, they have these file names and these file types just set up like this. So you can very quickly check what the file name is. We also have the audio, of course, and you already know what that's going to look like. It's going to look virtually identical. We grab the audios, we say create audio element. And then for the default case, this is the one where we say, okay, you're in the default case, so create the default element because we don't know what kind of file this is. Now you could just create an icon here for like the Word document if you wanted to. But then after we come out of the switch case, we then say element.dataset.filename is equal to file.name because we need that later, and we return the element. And you'll see why we need that in a second here. Let me scroll up. So that was our create and display file preview elements, the first part. So we create the element. We then need to give it a source. So we say the element.source is equal to reader.result. And I think that's where we're setting some of the data. We also have the href being set on the element. So if it's an image or if it's an href, that's sort of where we're setting that stuff. We then have the element attribute, which is going to be for our target. We just set the target to be blank. And then we add a class list to this, which is attachment preview singular. And the attachment preview singular is up here. And this is just forcing it to be that 50 by 50 pixel tile. And we set the max height and the font size and a whole bunch of stuff here just to sort of force it to obey the rules that we want it to follow. After we do that, we come back here and we paste in the attachment previews. So we grab the attachment previews and we append the element. So now the element has our attachment preview. It's been completely constructed. It has the image tag or the video tag. And we grab that and we throw it under the attachment previews. And remember, we're doing this for every single file that we've decided to upload. After we do that, we then say reader.read as data URL. And then this function is now done executing here. So at this point, let me save everything. And I'm just going to go ahead and try to refresh the server. I now have my upload button here. Let me click it. Let me grab a picture of my cat. And it looks like we have some issues here. And the issue is on change, this .clear previews is not a function. So let's go deal with the clear previews function. This is actually the single hardest function you'll ever have to write. We're going to scroll down to the bottom here just for organizational purposes. So this is how we clear the preview. We just set the inner HTML of the attachment previews to be empty. And that should clear up that error. Feel free to pause the video and rewind if you need to. But you know, this is just JavaScript at the end of the day. So then we click the plus button and I'm going to grab like the cat and a video and some audio. I click plus and there you can see we already have these buttons here. This is sort of what the tiles look like again. And if I hover over them, I don't know how easy it is to see, but it should, yeah, it changes the on hover a little bit. So let me hit send. And I hit send and nothing happens. The other thing is, if I refresh, when I click these buttons, if I, let's say, grab this and the video, I click open. If I click the cancel button, we also don't have the ability to remove these previews yet. So let's go take a look at those issues. Well, first, let's deal with removing the previews. This is going to look a little bit like this. So for our remove preview, it's really only going to take in the event. And GitHub Copilot's trying to help again. The first thing we need to do, because of how we set this up, we need to grab the target, but we need to do this by grabbing the event.target and then grabbing the closest parent node with a attachment preview. Because we can't just grab a div, we can't just grab an icon or an image or something. We need to very, very specifically target the outermost element or the closest outer element that has the attachment preview on it so that we are definitely grabbing whatever our main container is that we're considering for this image. So after we grab that main container, JavaScript actually currently doesn't let you manipulate a files list, which is what our list of images is when we upload it. This is considered a files list. So instead, we have to, like GitHub Copilot is suggesting, create a data transfer, which I guess lets you do a file list, but with a different name. It's a little bit strange. I don't fully understand why this works, but we then create a file input, which is just grabbing the message attachments element. So the message attachments is going to be so the message attachments is just going to be what the actual message or what the actual attachments are called in the element that Rails creates for you. We then create we say let files equal file input.files, which is your file list. So we then need to, because we can't edit this list of files and we're trying to remove a singular preview when you click on it, we need to create an array from this list of files. And because you can't write to this list of files, we can't assign this array back to this list of files. So what we have to do is we have to say, we want to do on the files array, we want to do a filter, and we want to filter out the file by the file name. So whatever we clicked on, we grab that thing's file name, we grab the dataset.file name from it, which is what we set earlier. That's why we set it. And we say, if it doesn't equal that, return it. So the only one we're not returning is the one we clicked on. After we do that, we then need to remove that child from the parent node. We then need to do we need to read this into the files array, or we need to read this into our data transfer. So we say files array.forEach file, data transfer.items.add file. And then for some reason, although you can't write to it normally, you can just assign the file input.files to be the data transfer.files. And for some reason, this is totally okay, but me manually editing the file list ends up in like a 12-hour Google search. So that was a little bit annoying, but my personal grievances aside, if I refresh now, hopefully we'll see some progress. So let me grab these images of the cats again and just see if I can remove these. And it looks like I can. Let me press send to see if any of these are going through. It doesn't look like it. So I probably have some logic messed up somewhere. So it looks like I have some unpermitted parameters when I click send on my attachments. So this is in fact going to be a messages controller issue. And it's because I can't spell attachments apparently. So let me save this. Explains why the formatting was off. I never pay attention to that, but I really should. Now let's click plus, click open, we'll click send. And now we have the images showing up. So let's see if we can send an audio file. That sounds like it's working. And then we can send a video. Looks like the video is working. I'm going to mute that because I know that one's really loud. And then let me try to send all of these things at once. I also have the scroll bar working. That's good. So I'll click send. Looks like they're all appearing. Of course, you might want to style the messages a bit better. So maybe there's only one per row. Now let me grab all these. And let me cancel the cat and this guy and the video. And then we should only get one cat and the audio. And we get the one cat and the audio. So I think that's actually going to do it for this tutorial. It was a bit of a shorter one. I didn't really go super in depth on how all of this works because it's just JavaScript and the active storage. But you can see here, I've opened up the console. This is sort of how this works in terms of what the files look like in here. So you just get the basic active storage URL. But if I click on one of these images, like this cat image, and I select this one, you can see this isn't just a URL. This is the actual data here, all loaded in, which is great because it also means when you get rid of it, you don't have to worry about it being in memory. It's just sitting there as an element. So I've been told that's more efficient. I don't know how true that is. Please stay safe out there, and I will see you in the next video.